Well, some people in this world shop for things to buy, but I shop for stores. Clothing stores that have clothes in my size and a style I like. Shoe stores that sell shoes a woman can walk in. Hardware stores that will sell you one washer just like the little ragged piece of plastic you brought in to show them. The way I figure it, if I choose the right stores, lots of day-to-day decisions are just taken care of, and I can focus on my life. I'm just not a shop-till-you-drop kind of gal. So when I go to scope out a grocery store, for instance, I ask myself questions. Do they sell the brands I like? Is their store brand good quality? Do they use shelf tags with a unit price? And is it correct? Do they keep the aisles wide enough to move around in? And so on. If they have these qualities, I will become a dedicated shopper at that store, patronizing them always, unless there's sales for Diet Coke somewhere else. But my dedication has limits. If they start insisting that their employees card the 60-somethings, or if they sell me sour milk, or if they run out of the things I need, I start store shopping again. Their problems with underage sales, cooler repair, or stocking their shelves are, to my mind, their problems. And if they don't keep meeting my needs, I'm out. You may wonder what this is leading to. It's leading to a conversation about the difference between being a consumer and being a citizen. Citizenship has, of course, a legal definition about where you were born and what kind of papers you have, but I'm talking here about spiritual citizenship, not legal citizenship. A spiritual citizen, papers and birthrights aside, is someone who has bound themselves by a national covenant of laws and ways, legal and social, who has decided freely that this is their country, the place their heart resides, the land they love, a reasonable manifestation of the values they cherish, the place of their people. This nation is their situatedness, their place in the world. I have met people who are legal citizens whose heart resides in another country, and I've met people who are not citizens yet, though they almost always aspire to become citizens, whose lives shine with their spiritual connection to America. I've also met people who are legal citizens but who've clearly decided not to cherish the covenants of civility or the spirit or the letter of the Constitution, whose spiritual citizenship I have to doubt. I'm seeing a lot of that sort of thing this political season. It frightens me. Being a consumer is a one-way deal. If they do what I want, I patronize them. I don't consider myself a part of the management or particularly loyal to the brand. I'm not a part of them. Citizenship, on the other hand, is a two-way deal. I give and I get. I don't just shop America. I am America. And while plenty of things go on in America that I don't like, I'm not going anyplace else. One of the things I cherish about my country is that I am free to criticize it, and criticize it I do. But in a very real sense, it is my country, right or wrong. I know that most of you feel the same way. Most citizens do. Spiritual citizenship, that covenanted relationship with a body of people, is not confined to nations. You can be a spiritual citizen of your town, your neighborhood. I've met spiritual citizens of the North Valley, haven't you? In this congregation, membership is a kind of spiritual citizenship, a freely made decision to lend a hand in doing what we do here, in cherishing the general values we cherish here, and an agreement to act here in ways which accord with those values. We don't snarl at each other here. We respect each other's worth and dignity here. We honor and even lean into human diversity here. And a covenant? What is that? We Unitarian Universalists should be very clear on this concept, because it's how we manage our congregations. And the reason we manage our congregations by covenant is because our spiritual ancestors, the Puritans, brought covenant to America. A covenant is a moral contract between two parties, not enforceable by law, but by sheer goodness and trust. Now, I'm aware that there are some people who have poor associations with the word covenant. In my childhood, where I grew up, the only time I ever heard the word covenant was in relationship to neighborhoods where homeowners had to sign an agreement called a covenant, but which was actually, after a 1926 Supreme Court decision, an enforceable contract, which you would not sell your house or rent it to a person who was not white or who even was Jewish. Neighborhood covenants were a tool of racism in the middle of the last century. These days, there are still legally enforceable neighborhood covenants, which aren't really covenants, they're just called that. But they deal with neighborhood standards of practice, like the color of roofs and the manicuring of lawns and the keeping of chickens, rather than who may live there. But that's not the kind of covenant I'm talking about. This morning's kind of covenant is not a legal thing, but a moral thing. An agreement among people to be together in a particular way, usually more general than specific, not really enforceable, except by appeal to a person's better nature and desire to belong. That's the kind of covenant that came to America with our spiritual ancestors, the Puritans. Here's the story. It's our founding story. It's what makes our congregations different from a supermarket, and we, its people, citizens, rather than consumers. In 1607, Reverend John Robinson, Englishman, scholar, brilliant preacher, a man who believed in the gradual growth of spirit in persons rather than what we now call a born-again experience, and for that had his church taken away from him by the bishops of England, he and a small group of devoted followers swore to each other that they would begin their own church. This church was to be devoted to the mutual teaching, prayer, and study of its members, all of whom joined freely. It was to be run democratically and was organized not around a bishop or a king, but not by assent to a creed or an authority or a book, but simply by the promise one to another to be together. John Bradford, then 17 years old, later elected many times mayor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, remembered the covenant this way. The Lord's free people joined themselves by covenant of the Lord into a church estate in the followership of the gospel, to walk in all his ways made known or to be made known unto them, according to their best endeavors, whatsoever it should cost them. Now I want you to just glance down at your order of service, at that affirmation we shared this morning, because it's a modern restatement of this 400-year-old covenant. I'll read the old version again. The Lord's free people joined themselves by covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in the followership of the gospel, to walk in all his ways made known or to be made known unto them, according to their best endeavors, whatsoever it should cost them. John Robinson's covenanted group suffered persecution in England and went to Amsterdam, then to Leiden, and then came to America, and they built a colony at Plymouth. As a part of their building, they built a church, the first parish of Plymouth. That church still stands, and it still houses a covenanted religious community. If you ever visit that church, you will see that later generations changed its name, which is now the First Parish of Plymouth, Unitarian Universalist. Through 5 centuries, the Pilgrim establishment of New England morphed towards a more liberal understanding of the religious quest. Early in the 19th century, it split into the Unitarians and the Congregationalists, with each town's parish church voting which way to go. Plymouth, they came with us. The Unitarians, the more liberal group, continued in the Puritan trust in individual people and never adopted a creed. And the theological center of our faith morphed through the 19th century into a non-Christian transcendentalism, and through the first 3/4 of the 20th century into an ever more atheistic humanism, and since then into a theologically diverse and respectfully spiritual place, so beautifully expressed in our church by the mural. So our faith has changed substantially from that of John Robinson and William Bradford, but there are also many things we share with our forebears from Plymouth. Like them, we covenant together to walk in truth and to search for truth. Like them, we gather as free people, binding ourselves not to an authority structure or a book or a tradition, but to each other in a democratic process which relies in smallest and largest matters on respect, persuasion, and commitment to growing truth. This church exists by covenant, not by creed. We'll explore that more in a couple of weeks. But today, in honor of the 4th of July weekend, I want to return to the national scene, to the kind of covenant that makes us spiritual citizens of this nation. There's no written American covenant, but we all know when it's broken. When a public figure resorts to personal insult to diss people he doesn't agree with, we recoil. That's not the way we do things around here, we say. We've bumped into the covenant. When politicians talk about doing things that are patently unconstitutional, we are restive. Our national covenant involves respect for our Constitution and for our fellow citizens, even those who do not know all its provisions. These days, the covenant we Americans share involves a respect for a diversity of persons that would have astounded our grandparents. Even those having difficulty honoring the widest bands of diversity extend their willingness to be civil to more kinds of humanity than most of their great-grandparents ever did. I think that this part of our covenant arose because there was never a royalty here, and because of that, everyone has a certain worth and dignity that once was accorded only to the few. And also because our history of our nation since the Civil War is that circle of what we mean by everyone who must be accorded worth and dignity has gotten more and more expansive in more and more places. And in spite of the discomfort that brings into the lives of those who are already comfortably in the circle and can count on almost everybody respecting their essential worth and dignity. Much as we struggle with this, we slog on because, well, that's our covenant with America and the American dream. Living our lives by honoring covenants does not only make us a particular kind of social order. It also, the covenants within which we live, and most of us are a part of several, civic, family, friendship groups, organizations like this congregation, those covenants ask certain things of us. They situate us in certain parts of society. They give us a launching pad, a place of comfort, a home, even a framework to rebel against. They limit our absolute freedom, but they create meaning and relatedness in our lives. They make us who we are. Once we are grown-ups, 25 years or so, we're mature, but not finished, for we grow in wisdom and spirit and love throughout our lives. Mostly the way we do that is with the friction created between ourselves and our covenants. Who we become as adults, you see, is not a matter of the most amazing 50 things we have done once. They are a matter of the things we've done 50 times or more, whether we felt like it or not, because we're related to other people, because we have obligations, because we love. That amazing trip to Hawaii and the helicopter ride over the mountains there, beautiful, refreshing, a great bonding experience. But what gives us character is the 50 visits to a shut-in friend or a distant parent, the care we took to write a will, the 4-year term on the volunteer board, the reading of Goodnight Moon to our 4-year-old yet again, and the way we attend to what our spouse wants and needs day after day. It's picking up litter in the park, dropped by accident, we hope, or by someone who's not grown up enough to feel good about honoring the covenant. It's volunteering with homeless families and honoring their resilience and their hard work when we do, and not only next week, but again in 3 months, and 3 months after that, because some things, this human care and regard, are much more important than grocery stores. and because while we look for deals when we shop, we look for meaning and relationships in our lives, and they make us who we are. Civic covenants are informal. They're not written down. They're in the landscape of what is and isn't done. They're enforced not by law, but by shock, disgust, and shame. Most people take notice when they realize they've shocked or disgusted others, and they have to stop and ask themselves if they are sure that what they are doing is justified, to avoid feeling ashamed. That doesn't mean that shocking or disgusting people is always bad. The first women to wear practical bloomers under their skirts shocked and disgusted their neighbors, but they felt good reasons for what they did, and I'm sure glad they did. A few people sure enough of themselves that they're willing to brave the withering glances of others is often the starting place of good changes in the social covenant. History, in the end, judges. Some people don't notice the effect they have on others or never ask themselves if they're sure that what they're doing is worth the disruption it's causing, or most dangerously, have no sense of shame at all. They just do what they do. They can't keep or even understand a covenant. But they are an unfortunate and difficult minority. Most people find meaning, mooring, and personal benefit in monitoring their actions and their effects on others, limiting their freedom and carrying on for good. Covenants change with the times. The civic covenant that helped people think of racially exclusive neighborhood covenants as pragmatic and neighborly has changed since 1960 because we have a wider understanding about who is our neighbor and what is just than we did then. Some of that's about laws, but a lot is about attitude, feeling, and behavior. Most people wouldn't feel good about doing that covenant thing anymore. The civic covenant does not always change for the better, and it is malleable. It only takes a few highly placed and frequently quoted persons, sports personalities, politicians, entertainers, to start speaking or acting outside of the covenant to begin to morph it. We thought we'd come to a place in our nation in which blatant racism and bigotry were outside of the public covenant, but we have a candidate for president who doesn't keep that covenant, and he is changing our nation. He's morphing it outside of what's now the covenant, changing what it means to be a spiritual citizen, and that will outlast this election. David Brooks proposes that we notice and cherish the part of our national covenant which enjoins us to treat each other with worth and dignity, and to celebrate a nation which progresses towards the goal of everybody without exception, as the thrust of history. He calls keeping that covenant patriotism, and along with love of land, appreciation of freedom, and honor to those who have fought for freedom, it's what we do. And while it's great fun to sing the songs and see the fireworks and eat the hot dogs, the work of patriotism is not just the military work of patrolling the seas. The work of patriotism is the work of all of us who offer those around us the dignity of their humanity and who love our country and use our moral energy to keep it heading towards justice. We keep the covenant of civility and relationship and ever-growing circles of understanding, whatsoever it may cost us, because it's who we are. We're about to sing one of our heroic hymns, We'll Build a Land. And while the images are of grand movements and hard work and nation building, it's really about the covenant that's made in the privacy of our own hearts with society at large. To do the simple things, to honor all of our neighbors, to vote, to pick up the trash in the neighborhood park, to take care of the people in all the ways you do. It's patriotic. It makes our nation what it is. Let's sing together. Number 121. Please stand as you